This video is brought to you by MoviePalette.com and enter ROOM15 for 15% off of your palette. Hey horror fans, I'm the Blood Guy and welcome back to another review of a film based on a real-life serial killer. And this is another one that I do not own, but I found it for free on YouTube, so you can check it out there if you haven't seen it. And this is another made-for-TV movie, and another one put out by ITV. As I've said before, these made-for-TV movies are some of the best, most thorough, and most accurate that you're going to get. And I've done a couple through ITV at this point. I know the last couple reviews I've done, See No Evil and This Is Personal, The Hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper, those were put out by ITV, or they aired on ITV. However, this is not part of that supposed trilogy of films put out by ITV based on real-life serial killers, which also consists of See No Evil, This Is Personal, and Appropriate Adult, which is another one I need to check out. But this was released on DVD of other films. I think they were all put out by ITV, which is This Is Personal, A is for Acid, and Brides in the Bath, which the latter two I also need to check out. But this came out, or this aired shortly after This Is Personal. That came out in 2000, and this came out in 2002. And it's about probably the most prolific serial killer in modern history. He might not be as much of a household name as some, but he's definitely one of the most prolific, not in serial killers in general, not just doctors, which he's known as, like the Angels of Death killer. He's deserving of the title Dr. Death, which has been given to a few different serial killer doctors. But this is the film Harold Shipman, Dr. Death, which, of all the killer doctors and nurses that's been out there, I mean, doctors, you have Christopher Dunch, which there's a new show on Peacock called Dr. Death that's based on him. So not to be confused with that. Also, Michael Swango, Jack Kevorkian, a bunch of them. I'd say Shipman is probably the most fascinating. Whereas with nurses, you have Kristen Gilbert, Elizabeth Wettlaufer. I'd say Charles Cullen is probably the most fascinating when it comes to nurses. And both of them are considered some of the most prolific in their respective countries. But Shipman is one of the most prolific throughout the world. I mean, he was convicted of killing 15 patients, but an inquiry after his, I think it was after his conviction, believed that he's quite possibly responsible for the deaths of upward anywhere between 218 and 250 victims. Which, if that's true, I think he's only topped by Pedro Lopez from the Andes, who supposedly killed over 300 children. But this film, even though it's a TV movie, it's not one of those 3-hour ones. It says it's 2 hours long, 120 minutes. The one that I saw on YouTube was an hour 36, so I don't know if it was cut. On IMDb, it says an hour 36, so I'm guessing it's the whole movie. But it's based on the Harold Shipman murders, which I probably should have looked up who wrote that, because I don't own any books specifically on Shipman, even though I would love to get one. I've seen a bunch of documentaries, like Most Evil Serial Killers, Born to Kill, a lot of the Real Crime, the stuff on the Real Crime channel. There's also like encyclopedic books like Serial Killing Doctors, British Serial Killers. I do have this Angels of Death book, which of course he's in it. Anything on killer doctors and nurses, he's going to be in. And of course him being in every encyclopedia that I have, about 24 of those. But for smaller books, he's shown up in all of these, including A to Z, The World's Worst Crimes. So he's very prolific and he pops up everywhere. But I do need to get a book specifically based on him. But this was written by Michael Eaton and directed by Roger Bamford, and it stars James Bolam as Harold Shipman, along with James Hazeldine, Olive Pendleton, Deborah Norton, Peter Gunn, and Peter Penry Jones. The theme was composed by Debbie Wiseman, and I want to see who did the cinematography, but it doesn't tell me. Put out by ITV and aired July 9th, 2002. So this actually came out 2 years before Shipman committed suicide in his cell. So, of course, it doesn't say that at the end of the film. In fact, there's no end text whatsoever. I would say this movie was fairly accurate. Based on everything I've read about Shipman, everything I've seen on Shipman, it seems fairly accurate. If there was any kind of discrepancies, they might have altered how some of the events happened, which is going to happen anyway. This is not a film that's really based on the life and crimes of Shipman. It really takes place during the last year or so of his killing spree. Opens up sometime in 1997. Shows his last few victims, including his last victim, Kathleen Grundy, the forgery of her will, how that led to his downfall, the investigation that came from that, the amateur sleuthing that Kathleen Grundy's daughter did, which in real life she also did with her husband. Her husband's kind of excluded from the film. But how all of that led to the arrest of Shipman. And pretty much just ends with him being found guilty. And it's a very straightforward film. But even with how straightforward it is, again, it's quite accurate. I'm not completely well versed in the Harold Shipman story, not as much as I am, say, Bundy, Dahmer, Gacy, Gein, guys like that. But I really just knew the sort of broad strokes, like stuff that you would see in any 45-minute documentary or anything you'd read in like a few-page article of these smaller books. I pretty much knew the broad strokes of Shipman, which this movie kind of is really what it's about, is broad strokes. It doesn't get too in-depth. Actually, it doesn't really get in-depth to his life at all. It doesn't really show anything of his backstory. Briefly mentions his arrest and drug addiction in 1976, his mother dying in front of him after being given a shot when he was 17. That's really it. Other than that, it really just shows how he practices, shows him killing a couple of his victims, and then really everything involving his final victim, how that led to his downfall. That's basically the film. It's kind of half Harold Shipman film, kind of half, I wouldn't really say detective procedural, because it's not as in-depth of an investigation as, say, This Is Personal or Capture the Green River Killer. It really just shows the main events, I guess. But it's not a bad film. It's well done. It is well acted. I'll say James Bolam does do a good job as Shipman. He doesn't 100% look like Shipman. I mean, you can definitely tell why they got him. I mean, he's an older guy with a beard. You can definitely buy him as a doctor. He looks like someone that's well respected in the community. He did do a good job. He kind of reminded me of one of the Attenboroughs, like maybe either John or Richard Attenborough. He kind of reminded me of him, which one of them played John Christie in 10 Rillington Place, which I really need to get. But yeah, James Bolam did just fine as Shipman. Nothing bad that I can say about him. He does a really good job at playing the caring doctor, the very cold serial killer, the very arrogant suspect, until finally, when he finally breaks down, when he realizes it's all over, which is a brief scene. I wouldn't say he's robotic, but the changes are subtle. It's a lot to do with his voice and his facial expressions that does a lot of his acting, but I'd say he did do a good job as Shipman. Everyone else, as far as acting, I mean, they did fine, but there wasn't really a standout performance. But yeah, I thought it was a good film. I mean, everything it shows did happen. It doesn't go as in depth as other films I've seen, which was actually kind of a nice change of pace. I've been doing a lot of these like 3 hour uh, TV films that take a lot of time to do. So it was kind of nice to just get an hour and a half, very straightforward film where a lot of it was accurate. There wasn't a whole lot of discrepancies that I could find. Uh, I did read that supposedly Shipman was the only British doctor to be found guilty of murder. But then I heard of this guy, Ben Geen, who was found guilty to have murdered 2 patients and committed severe bodily harm to 15 others. But I guess he was just a nurse. And his case actually sounds very similar to that Doctor Death Christopher Dunch series, which I did see a trailer for that and it looks really good. I really would like to watch that. But this film, I mean, was it a standout for serial killer films? No. Uh, but it was decently made. It was well made. Uh, can anybody learn anything from it? Sure. If you don't know anything about Harold Shipman, other than anything that you could find in like a brief article in a book like this, sure, there's stuff to learn here. But I would say this is kind of along the lines, although far better made than these films. But like the 2002 Ted Bundy film or the 2002 Dahmer film, I wouldn't quite call it a a, a bullet point film because it doesn't really go through all the bullet points of Harold Shipman's life and crimes. Again, it just takes place during a very narrow window. But then again, he was consistently killing people for 23 years. So, I mean, kind of hard to really chronicle all that in 90 minutes, but so it's not quite as much of a bullet point film as those, but it's close. I mean, it does significant things that it doesn't show. It does mention, like his arrest in '76, the death of his mother, stuff like that. But even for just showing that short window between 1997 and his conviction in 2001, it has plenty in there. You get to see this guy. It opens up him hosting some charity event to go towards his surgery or his. I think they call it doctors' offices surgeries over in Britain. I'm guessing to either open that or go towards that, and how everyone loves and respects this guy. To the final shot of the film being 200 some candles lit in a church to represent his victims, and seeing him, be convicted of these murders. So you do get to see him go from A to B, a well-respected pillar of the community, to being seen as this monster called Dr. Death. It could have done a better job at showing the community's side of it. I mean, there are scenes where people are giving the inspectors shit. Say, like, how dare you go after Shipman? How dare you go after Dr. Fred? Because that's what they knew him as. His middle name is Frederick, so he went by Fred to a lot of close friends. It does have scenes of close friends being, how dare you go after him? Or even just patients challenging the police. So, but it could have done more to show the community's reaction of, before he's a suspect, before the investigation, during, and then after. Because to me, that's one of the most fascinating parts of some of these killers, like with Gacy or like BTK, is how the community sees them. When they're seen as pillars of the community, and then everyone backs them up during the trial and investigation, but then they're found guilty and the public eye changes. I think that would have been a very interesting avenue to show a little bit more of. It doesn't really show his personal life at all. I think his wife might be in one or two frames, if that. So it doesn't really show his personal life. Again, it really just shows what happened from '97 on. But again, solidly made. It does have good attention to detail, like This Is Personal, like See No Evil, like these ITV films. They do pay attention to more acute details, which I always commend. I'm a huge sucker for accuracy and acute details. So this is one that I can definitely recommend. I think people might like this one more because I think you really have to be a true crime enthusiast to really like films like This Is Personal, where it's like 3 hours, 15 minutes. You don't even see the killer's face until 3 hours, 7 minutes. It's more about the investigation. I can see people getting mad that it's not Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, or it's not the 2002 Bundy film, or it's not the Netflix Dahmer series. But I can see people liking this because it is more half and half. It shows Harold Shipman doing his thing, committing murders, and it has the investigation. So it's the best of both worlds. And I thought it was well made. It's, I keep repeating myself, but fairly accurate. There wasn't a whole lot that I saw that I knew of that was really wrong. Definitely nothing egregious, but well acted, told the story well. It was even shot, I don't know if the interiors were shot in the building, but I know the outside of Shipman's real doctor's office, it was shot on location in Hyde, England. So yeah, another solid ITV film. I really enjoyed it. So with that, we'll get into the brief summary and then the film itself. So as always, I just like to give a brief summary or brief cliff notes on the real-life killer that the film was based on. So Harold Shipman, a general practitioner in Hyde, Greater Manchester, England, is not only the most prolific of the Angel of Death serial killers, or the most prolific in England, but possibly the most prolific serial killer in modern history. Convicted of murdering 15 of his patients in 2001, it is believed that he killed anywhere between 218 and 250 patients between 1975 and 1998. He was known as a pillar of his community and a well-respected doctor in his town of Hyde, opening his own surgery or a local office in 1992. He would administer a lethal dose of morphine to his patients, either at his office or in their home. They were often found sitting up in their chairs, similar to how he witnessed his mother die after given a shot when he was 17. He would then sign their death warrants, citing no post-mortem needed, and many were cremated, destroying any evidence of an overdose. Though he was arrested for possession and forgery in 1976 to aid his own addiction to pethidine, he only had to attend a rehab center and was allowed to keep his license, only to kill for another 22 years. Though he never killed for financial gain until his final victim, Kathleen Grundy, on June 24, 1998, when he forged her will to leave her entire estate of just under £400,000 to him. Some 10,000 pounds of jewelry taken from his patients was found in his garage after he was convicted. This forgery is what led to an investigation, including an exhumation of 12 of his victims, and his arrest on September 7, 1998. He was found guilty of 15 counts of murder and 1 of forgery on January 31, 2001. He was found hanging in his cell on January 13, 2004, the day before his 50th birthday. If his death toll of 250 is true, that makes him the most prolific serial killer in modern history, only surpassed by Pedro Lopez in the Andes, who supposedly killed over 300 children. He was also the only doctor in Britain to be found guilty of murdering his patients. The only other was John Bodkins Adams in 1957 of one murder, but he was acquitted soon after. In the years since Shipman's arrest, there has been what's called the Shipman effect, which has caused more strict regulations in dispensing practices, prescribing pain medication, single doctor practices, and forms needed for cremation. And so now we get into the film itself, which it doesn't open up with text. It doesn't even open up with, this is based on a true story, but certain names or events or whatever. And from what I've seen and from what I can find, all the names of victims, law enforcement, people in Shipman's life are all the real life names as well. So the film opens up with Shipman hosting a charity auction for patients. I couldn't find anything specific, but he did do stuff like that. But it does have names, dates on screen, which I always like. It's easier to look things up if I don't know it. But May 29th, 1997, a woman named Ivy goes in for an appointment on her arm, and Shipman gives her an injection. This is based on Ivy Loma or Lamas, which is her name in the film. She was killed that date in a treatment room, as it shows, and it was shot outside Shipman's actual office. So yeah, she came in, she was in one of the treatment rooms, he gave her a shot, left her there, treated other patients, and then later on, he told his secretary, we should probably call the funeral home, which is how the film portrays it. Then it says 6 months later, there's another woman that dies in her home, possibly based on Elizabeth Mary Baddeley, who died in her home on November 21st of 97. Suspicion arises in the daughter of a funeral home parlor owner. Her name was Deborah Bambroff, daughter of Alan Massey of Frank Massey and Sons Funeral Home. Those are their real names. She's usually, if you're reading about Shipman, you usually come up Deborah Massey, but after she got married, it was Deborah Bambroff, which is what as she's credited as in the film. Shipman goes to visit a delirious pneumonia patient named Jim. Excuse me. His wife makes Shipman not give him the medication he was about to give him a lethal dose, but she makes him take Jim to the hospital, where a doctor tells her that the dosage of Epilim that he's been taking for over a year is way too high, and usually given to cancer patients, which he's found not to have. And it mentions that he was diagnosed with cancer by Shipman 18 months prior, and this is true. This is based on Jim King. He was misdiagnosed with prostate cancer and was given a large dose of Epilim. He contracted pneumonia. His wife called Shipman and stopped him from giving him a lethal dose, and that saved his life. He actually ended up getting a huge settlement of £260,000 after Shipman's trial. Though I believe this whole thing with Jim King, with him being diagnosed with cancer and almost given the lethal shot, I believe that actually happened in 1989, not 97. So if that's true, then that's really the only major difference that I could find in this film. Alan Massey sees Shipman about concerns. Shipman says he has nothing to hide and shows him his register book. True, this was in April of 98, but it was also during this time there was an initial, but nothing came out of it, investigation. Shipman was known to be very cocky or arrogant, as in like, oh, I have nothing to hide. Go ahead and take it. You can look at whatever you want. And even though he had good bedside manners for his patients, he was said to be very arrogant and act like he was intellectually superior to everyone that he talked to. Uh, Jim King, now better, gets a call saying that his father had died, and it shows that it's the Christmas season, which is true. He died Christmas Eve. The movie shows it's Christmas time. Died at his home after Shipman visited him for lightheadedness. He was 83. And I don't think it mentions it, but two of Jim King's aunts were also victims of Shipman's. Uh, Dr. Linda Reynolds holds a conference with the defense unit over her concerns of the high cremation rate and high number of deaths in patients with no fatal illnesses, all involving Shipman, and what to do about it. I do believe that to be true. I do believe there was some conference with some kind of a medical board before police got involved. Shipman tells King he doesn't have cancer, which is true. Again, I think this whole thing happened in '89. Investigators start looking into Shipman. Inspector Dave Smith tells Reynolds that they looked into all victims cremated recently, and Shipman seems fine. Again, this is part of that initial pre-Kathleen Grundy investigation. And Detective Inspector Stan Edgerton talks to Alan Massey. Again, there was an investigation, but nothing came up initially. Stan Edgerton, that is his name in real life, and I believe he worked in some capacity on the Morse murders case, which was very interesting. And Dave Smith was the name of another inspector during this time. Shipman treats Kathleen Grundy at his office. He asks if she'll participate in a study on aging by Manchester University. She signs a consent form with witnesses Paul Spencer and Claire Hutchinson. And he then shows them forging a will and her signature. This is all true. Even the names, and this took place some 2 weeks before her death. There was some 29-year-old guy, Paul Spencer, a woman with a child, Claire Hutchinson. He did tell her there was a study on aging from Manchester that he was involved in, and that's how he got her to sign a sheet of paper. June 24th, 1998, Shipman goes to Grundy's home to collect a blood sample for the aging study, but instead of taking blood, he gives her a lethal dose of morphine, and she dies. She's later found by two friends when she didn't show up for a luncheon. True. They then call Shipman, who said the COD was old age. True. Which, that was one of the first things they noticed, because even though she was like 81 years old, I believe, she was known to be in excellent health and very, very active, and the way he described her as frail and weak and old age, people really did believe him. A solicitor named Brian Burgess, which was his name in real life, from Hamilton's Ward, which was the real firm, calls Grundy's daughter, Angela Woodruff, 2 weeks later about the will, saying that they got it June 24th, the day she died, but she also had a will, the real will. That's all true. So, and it does get into the amateur sleuthing that Angela does. Again, she did it with her husband in real life, but he's kind of excluded from the film. It shows Woodruff going to see Paul at his pet store to ask him about being a witness to the will signing. Because at this point, I think she met up with Burgess and got that copy of the will. There was also these notes that Shipman sent along with the will. I don't think the movie gets into depth about the notes that he also sent, which he signed as J. Smith, which they found out to not be a real person. But yeah, she has him sign something. She compares the signatures, says she already did that with Claire Hutchinson, which is true. She talked to both people, got a sample of their handwriting, tested it to the will. So I think he forged theirs as well. She then reads the the forgery out loud for us to hear. Says, I give all my estate, money, and my house to my doctor. My family are not in need, and I want to reward him for all the care he has given me and the people of Hyde. He is sensible enough to handle any problems this may give him. My doctor is Dr. H.F. Shipman, 21 Market Street, which is exactly how he typed out the will. So, verbatim, Woodruff contacts Inspector Edgerton and Detective Sergeant John Ashley. They believe that it's a fake, and both of their real names. Edgerton was the arresting officer. He's kind of the lead investigator in this. And yeah, as soon as they saw it in real life, they knew it was a fake. It was shoddily typed. I think it even had some like spelling errors. It was missing letters because it was on an old Brother typewriter. Grundy's body is exhumed. True. That was August 1st of 98, 1 month after her funeral. Shipman presented with a warrant to have his home and work searched. True. They don't find anything, but he does offer them the typewriter, saying, Grundy used to borrow this all the time, which he did do. Another side of his arrogance and thinking he knows how things are going to play out. True, although her prints were never found on it. Police look into Shipman's patients' deaths over the past year, who's been cremated, their wills, etc. Their wills come out fine because Grundy was the first time he forged a will. It does show some backlash from the community, saying Fred was a great man and a great doctor. True. A taxi driver named John Shaw approaches Inspector Edgerton, saying that he's come up with a list of names from people since 1992 that were in fine health and then they died, that were all patients of Shipman. He believes Shipman has killed at least 21 people. Shipman's computer is searched. True. Which they'll come back to that later. Toxicologists tell inspectors that Grundy's body had high amounts of morphine found in her liver, which traces of diamorphine was found in her system and to be the true cause of death. Inspectors bring up a charge from 22 years ago, Shipman being an addict and pleading guilty to 3 charges of obtaining pathogen by deception, 3 unlawful possession, and 2 for forging. And something about asking for 67 more charges to be looked into. That I couldn't find anything on. But true, in February of 76, he was charged with forging scripts for a pethidine, which he was addicted to. I don't know if the number of charges are correct, but in 76 he was charged for forging prescriptions, which is also deception and possession. And all he had to do was attend a rehab, and he was able to keep his license. Then it says September 7th, 1998, Shipman questioned about the death of Kathleen Grundy and forgery of her will. They mentioned the typewriter, and he is arrested for both murder and forgery. True date, he was arrested September 7th, which in fact, the photo you saw earlier when he has his arms out, there was something about how he left for something that day, or it was shortly before he was actually officially formally arrested. He was outside and he was said to put his arms out like Jesus and say, "Go ahead, take photos of me." I believe that photo is from when he said that. A computer analyst is able to detect that Shipman's reports were entered after the deaths of his victims, not the dates that the reports say. So after a victim would be killed, he would go into their medical history and go back several months and do all this fake stuff like chest pains or angina or cancer. He would then create this complete false medical history. But he always did that after they died. So, of course, that's fishy. They're able to discover that through the computer that he did it after they died. Some would suggest that he forged the will in order to get caught, which there's a book in 2000 called Prescription for Murder, which I think is considered probably the most definitive work on Shipman. Uh, Journalists Brian Whittle and Gene Ritchie suggest that he either forged the will out of desperation to get caught because his life was out of control, or because he planned to retire at 55 and flee the United Kingdom. So those are just theories. His prints were found on the forged will, obviously true. Police interviewed the daughter of victim Winifred Meller. She died May 11th of 98. We then get a flashback to when Shipman was meeting with her family. He says that her death was coronary thrombosis, which, as the film shows in a flashback, said that she had a history of angina and that post-mortem was unnecessary. True. In the flashback, the daughter tells Shipman that neighbor Mrs. Ellis saw him visiting Meller earlier that day, and he denied it. In real life, Gloria Ellis, the neighbor, did see him visit earlier in the morning, and then when he showed up later, she was actually the one that let him in. She helped him get in the house, where he feigned shocked discovery at her body. Meller was one of the 12 bodies to be exhumed, also. Edgerton and Father Dennis debate on whether he was born evil or likes to play God. Edgerton suggests that it stems from seeing his mother die from being administered drugs when he was 17. It has been said that that was probably a huge factor in either why he became a serial killer, why that was his MO. Both playing God and sort of recreating his mother's death. Not all his victims were female, but an overwhelming majority of them were. Father Dennis Marr was also present for 3 of the exhumations, which I think it does show him at least one. Shows more bodies being exhumed. It shows the marker for Bianca Pomfret, who died December 10th, 97, which that is her true name, that is her true date of death. It doesn't show, I don't think it shows 12 bodies, but 12 bodies were exhumed. And the organs of those 12 were saved for post-mortem examinations, and they were saved for over a decade, where they were unceremoniously incinerated February 16th, 2011, which there was a big controversy around that. Of course, that's 9 years after this film aired, but he's questioned again, this time about his computer records. True. His lawyer asks for a break, and Shipman is heard sobbing. They see him on his knees, sobbing, sort of holding his lawyer. Which is true, but in real life, I think Shipman was the one to request a break from questioning. But he was seen on his knees with his lawyer, sobbing, having a mental breakdown, and begging his lawyer to tell them that he's unfit for questioning. And his lawyer's name was Ann Ball. And the film, they note how he's crying for himself and not his victims, which of course they would go on to say in countless documentaries and books. January 31st, 2000, Shipman found guilty of 15 counts of murder and 1 of forgery, and sentenced to life for each murder. True. And then it shows Edgerton and Father Dennis in the church with all these candles with name tags. And then the camera just pans back and it shows like some 200 something candles lit for his victims. I don't know if there was a vigil like that, but there was a memorial called the Garden of Tranquility that was opened in July 2005 for his 250 victims. No end text, but this did come out before he hanged himself in February 2004. And so that's Harold Shipman, Dr. Death. Again, a very straightforward film, pretty much just broad strokes, kind of. I don't want to call it surface level, but it doesn't really go very in depth to his personal life or his past, or even too much into his crime spree. Really, just that that window of that final year. But even then, it's well made. It's pretty accurate. Again, these TV movies are some of the most accurate that you're gonna get. Again, the only real thing was maybe slightly altering how some events played out, or if everything surrounded Jim King happened in '89 rather than '97. But even so, it's well acted. It, it's a good balance between a Harold Shipman film and sort of the detective procedural. So it's the best of both. uh, there there was a mini series. I think it was just called Harold Shipman in 2014 that I would love to check out. That's probably more in depth. Uh, but yeah, this is definitely one where if you don't know anything about Harold Shipman, you can definitely check it out. It's not so off base that you'll have a lot of misinformation. You can definitely learn at least the basics about the 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 most latter part of his crime spree and the investigation. But also check out other books by him or any kind of documentary. In fact, I think the miniseries was, I can't remember what it was called now. I just saw the name of it too, but it's from 2014. But yeah, very solid film. I mean, straightforward, simple. It's not a standout, but it's still well made. So I am waiting on one more serial killer film to come in. Then I'll order a couple more. There's a bunch more on YouTube that I'll be checking out. So, and then I want to do more reviews of documentaries and then just more topical videos, like comparing, showing the similarities between Jeffrey Dahmer and the British Jeffrey Dahmer, Dennis Nilsen. I will be reviewing the David Tennant Nilsen uh, TV series Des when that comes in. So stay tuned for all those, and thank you for watching.